Committee on Accessibility and Inclusiveness to order for March 23rd, 2022. I'd like to first recognize that we live, work, and play on the traditional territories of the Nanaimo First Nations, and we thank them. So tonight it's going to be one focus, really. It's about providing feedback. I'm so happy to see all of you here and that we can hold this meeting. This feedback is incredibly invaluable to us because it ends up coming from this committee. This input will go directly to council. Kirsty will explain more of the process, but I'm really looking forward to hearing what everybody has to say. So I'm just going to turn it over to, is Lisa going to be here first or going directly to Kirsty?
Chair, just before we jump into that, just some procedural items.
I skipped right to the best part. Yes. How about chairing it? Yes. I called the meeting to order. Is there any introduction of late items?
There are no late items, but we would like a motion for adoption of the agenda.
So a motion, so moved by Jocelyn, seconded by Rachel. All those in favor? Yay. Motion passes. Now on to item 4, presentations and the reimagined city draft plan. So now I will turn it over to Kirsty. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. The purpose of today is really to build on a conversation that we had, I believe it was a month ago, maybe just a little bit over a month ago, where we introduced some of our draft policies through the Nanaimo City Plan to this committee, and also revisiting some conversations we had in December with many of you, where we delved into some of the policies as they were in they were being incubated, I guess, at that time, and some of the definitions. And then we want your feedback really today, really an honest conversation through the form of motions that we can bring to council to help make this plan the best it can be as we move forward. I'm going to share some slides with you and go through some timelines, but really we've put our thoughts together on how we can have these policies be guiding principles and guiding policies for us for the next 20 or more years. So we want them to be long-term, and then coupled with the policies will be future actions that'll be more implementation plans. But today our topic is action. So I'm just going to share my screen. And please let me know if I'm speaking too quickly as well. I know I have a tendency to do that sometimes. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Great. Yep. So at first, we're going to talk about some of the definitions, and this is a repeat of some of the definitions that you might have seen in our draft city plan glossary, but also we did look at back in December. And then we're going to look at some of the city plan structure, some of the detailed policies, and also next steps for where we're taking this through the summer to City Council for adoption. We will be doing a number of check-ins. So I'm going to present a few slides and then have an opportunity to measure how the committee feels about that and then go into some discussion. So that'll be the format, a few slides and then a discussion break. And then we're going to move right into definitions to start. So you might have seen, if you had a chance to look through the draft plan, I know we had sent you a chapter. We had sent you the Empowered chapter about 4 to 6 weeks ago. But now, hopefully you've received the full plan. And one of the definitions that came up, I remember at least, of importance to this committee in December was the idea of diversity and what was included in that definition of diversity. So at the moment, we've taken a definition from Racial Equity Tools, and this is the definition that we're using at the moment for city plan. But with these definitions, we know that there's many nuances of meaning, and we want them to stand the test of time for that 20-year span or 25-year span, so we want them to be as open as possible and try to use as least amount of buzzwords, I guess, as possible, so that they do stand the test of time. And then we also have this definition of equity. And equity was another topic and definition that I know we spent some time discussing. And this one we took from the official community plan through the City of Victoria. So I'm just going to pause here while these are up on the screen and ask through this definition section if there's any concerns or elements that are missing, or maybe any wordsmithing that the committee would like to see with these definitions as we move forward.
And thank you. And with the screen showing, I may not see everybody's hands, so I may need the assistance of Sky. But right now, the people I can see on the screen is Jocelyn, Rachel, Adrian. And that's it for who I can see.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'll jump in if I see anybody with their Zoom hand raised or their physical hand raised.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any questions right now, so we can probably move on.
So the next set of definitions includes inclusivity, and actually inclusion, sorry. So I'm just trying to remember why we're presenting two different options, I guess, here. They're slightly different. One, again, from Racial Equity Tools, and another from the City of Victoria. They're very similar, but two different takes on the definition of inclusion. Are there any comments regarding these or any preferences? And I'm not actually extremely familiar with Racial Equity Tools, and knowing if that's a standard, or if anyone of the committee is really aware of a standard as far as definitions go, or a place that we should be looking. We have vetted some of these definitions with the province of BC and the Accessibility Directorate, but others we've been looking to other places to give us guidance for what is an appropriate definition.
Okay, and I have some thoughts around that, but first I've got Jocelyn.
Thanks. The word authentically just seems a bit odd in that one. I don't know why that, it just seems to introduce a judgment about what is an assessment of traditionally excluded individuals or groups. I think I get the general idea of why it's there, but it kind of, for that reason, I prefer the second, but there are components that I like about both.
Thank you. And Rachel?
I think I might have mentioned this when we first reviewed these definitions, but traditionally excluded individuals and groups may also include groups that used to be excluded and are now not. For example, the Italian community. Also Ukrainians, like they used to not be able to get jobs based on their last name. This is not the case anymore in Canada. So I would be in favor of saying marginalized individuals and groups, because that's more of a current lens, and like, yeah, I'd be really surprised if people were still being marginalized for being Italian or Ukrainian in Canada, for example.
Thank you. Adrian?
I didn't realize I was next. I agree with both comments. The authentically is interesting. I think it's the placement in the sentence. I took it as meaningful engagement as opposed to rubber stamp engagement. And I do like the way that definition talks about sharing power. Overall, I think I like the second definition better. And thank you so much for that, Rachel. I come from a fully Ukrainian family on my mother's side, where several people changed their names for that exact reason.
Thank you. And Sarah, I guess when people put up their hand, they end up showing up on my screen. So that might be, that's very helpful. Sarah, thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to point out that at the end of the first definition, it says equitable access to opportunities. And then in the beginning of the second one, it says improving the terms of participation for people who are disadvantaged. And I think those are the same thing. We're talking about equitable access or the terms of participation for people who are disadvantaged. They're sort of similar. So the first one, that's really a key piece of the first one. I would think that the second one includes that aspect as well as a bit more around who those groups could be, who those excluded individuals or marginalized groups are. That's all.
Thank you. And if I don't see any further speakers, and I don't know if this is possible, but I see both definitions because they serve different purposes. I look at the first definition as being more the vision, the what we want to see, the sharing of power and celebrating the differences, ensuring people are welcome. But the second definition is more about how the process needs to, improve the terms of the participation in the society, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know if we had to choose between the two, I'm more in favor of the second one, as the other speakers have said. But I kind of think both of them serve a purpose. So that's my thoughts. Thank you. Oh, it's me chairing. Sorry. So with no further speakers, we can move on, Kirsty?
Definitely.
Thank you.
And I see no harm in us combining the best parts of any of these definitions either and coming up with a new definition. We're really taking these from other places to set the bar for ourselves. So if that's what this committee ends up being most comfortable with, we can definitely make motions or just through future discussions with council recommend bring forward some of these suggestions as well. But as we move forward, we might want to make some motions at the end of the definition section on some of the edits that we've heard today.
Thank you.
Not advancing. Oh, there we go. Universal design. So we've taken this one from the Center for Excellence in Universal Design. And universal design we understood from previous discussions with this committee, as well as I believe it was spinal cord BC in the inclusion workshop that we did in December, Jocelyn, where universal design seemed to be the most appropriate term, I guess, for showing physical access to all. We know that other people have been using other terms, but this seems to be the most, this was our understanding at least, the most current definition for physical access and physical spaces that can be navigated by all. So please let us know what you think of this definition, or if there's a better one out there that you're aware of that captures what we're trying to say.
If I can just mention, yep. I remember one of the comments about it, which I actually wasn't able to sort of figure out after the fact, was that universal design as an ethos really started from physical access, like infrastructure and spaces. But a fair question in the terms of our committee is, does it also include the uses and access by different groups, like gender neutral washrooms, for example? So I can't really answer this question, sadly, but I think that's an interesting one to contemplate for the purposes of the city. And I don't think we should be ashamed to add to it, saying we understand universal design to include the uses of all people, regardless of their age, ability, or, you know, however we want to describe it, other needs or human rights, you know.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else that wished to speak to this particular definition for universal design? Okay, thank you. Back to you, Kirsty.
Okay, well, that brings us to the end of the definition section. So we'll be moving on to a little bit more discussion about the structure and the policies next. But just before moving on, because we have discussed some edits to these designs, I'm just wondering if the committee, how the committee might want to move forward with making some of these suggestions via council. We will be getting to next steps in a moment, but just as the meeting was gearing up, we were talking about the process of the motions that come out of this committee can go to the GPC meeting that council is having on Monday the 28th, and council can then start to make some, at least start hearing what the committee's feedback is for everything we're going to talk about tonight, as well as either make some staff direction now or wait until May 9th, which is when they're going to be reviewing all of the committees and all the feedback, and then make some direction to council about what edits to make. So I'm not sure if at this stage it would be worthwhile visiting some of those edits that have been suggested through the committee, or whether we should wait till the end. And Councillor Martman, whatever you're comfortable with.
I would like to appreciate, I always like to go forward as soon as possible. So if anybody has any suggestions right now, definitively, I know we reviewed these, as you said, in December. If anybody sees anything that they want to see changed right now, so we can put forward a motion, I would say let's do that now. If you're comfortable with it, and or I guess it's you're looking for a choice between the definition in inclusion. Which one do we want, or is that something that can wait till a later date, Kirsty?
It can definitely wait, but it's something you can make a suggestion. I think based on what we heard today, it sounds like there's probably some merits in combining those two definitions with an emphasis on the second, is what I was hearing, at least from some of the feedback. And it sounds like each of the definitions can use a little bit of editing to make it reflect maybe some of the committee's desires. So certainly we can work to doing a second take on these as well. And the feedback doesn't have to all come through today's meeting on all of these topics.
Okay.
So we're discussing today with the committee, and any motions that come forward will go to council. But our feedback period ends on April 8th right now. And so either through the committee, through future discussions, or as individuals, the committee members can all be making, and we hope are making, giving us feedback, filling out surveys, and providing other insights on specifics throughout this draft city plan.
Okay. So there is more opportunity if we don't have to get into the gritty of it right now, unless somebody has a motion they want to make that is a clear edit on one of these definitions. Maybe we'll just move on to the next section. Do I see anybody with putting their hands up? And I don't. So, okay, I think we're safe to move on, and I'm sensing that everybody's so far comfortable with the process. Thank you.
So our draft city plan will be in two documents, and the document that you've reviewed right now is this first one, Nanaimo City Plan, which is Nanaimo Reimagined. And it's really a bylaw document. It will become a bylaw document in the future, and it has long-term policies that will guide staff's work for the next 25 years. Because it is an adopted bylaw, it's a difficult document to amend. We amend them regularly, typically on a 6-month or so cycle. but there is a formal process through council that has to go through any amendments, as they will inevitably come up over the next 25 years. And as opposed to a future document that you probably will be seeing in the future, but it's an integrated action plan, which is quite different in that it's very updatable. It'll probably be something that staff will review annually or every few years, and it focuses on implementation in the immediate future and ongoing stages. And it focuses on both projects and programs. But today our focus is really this policy section, which will be adopted by bylaw. And it will also be submitted to the province, as we spoke to a month ago, and we'll be forming our accessibility plan for Nanaimo as a requirement of the province. So the sections that we felt most applicable to this committee are sitting under this Part C policies under Empowered Nanaimo. But as you probably have noticed, if you've read through or flipped through the document, that there is accessibility policy in many of these sections. And one I might want to highlight here is this Connected Nanaimo section, which does have a lot of accessibility policies related to transit, future alternative transportation, also other sections such as a Healthy Nanaimo talk a lot about recreational accessibility, which of course is of interest to the committee. But for probably what we're looking at today, the three sections that we're going to be focusing on are equity and inclusivity, political voice and engagement, and access for all, which sit in this Part C 04 Empowered Nanaimo. And just to show you some examples of how we've tried to cross-reference integration throughout the plan, there are many symbols throughout the plan. And if you're using the online version, there's actually hyperlinks that you can navigate between different sections. So if you're in, for instance, Access for All, you can see all the other integrated policy sections and click on any of these links in the hyperlinked online document, and it will take you right to some of those other sections I mentioned that have relevance or have integrated components that may or may not be applicable to what you're looking for. But we've tried to make it as integrated a document as possible to show those connections. And if any of that isn't working for you as you're navigating, please also let us know, because, and I don't mean functionally working, but if we're missing the mark, I guess, on some of that integration, or if it's maybe not as clear as it could be if we reorganize some sections differently as well, because we can certainly look at doing that too. And we've really focused on two different types of scales, looking at the city built structure. The first being an urban center scale, which is what we're calling our commercial centers, mostly the malls, as they redeveloped with residential and other multi-uses, as well as what we're seeing in residential neighborhoods. So trying to layer all of those policies at these two different scales to show what it would really be like to live in Nanaimo, either at an urban center scale or a neighborhood scale, and how all of those policies will be realized on the ground 25 years from now. Any questions about that integration or the idea of the two different scales before we move on to the policy nitty-gritties?
I'm not seeing anybody's hands raised, but please do if you have any questions. Not at this time, so I think you're good to go, Kirsty.
Great. So first of all, an Empowered Nanaimo is a very diverse section of the Nanaimo City Plan. It probably has the most diversity in topic area, and this chapter includes policies regarding truth and reconciliation, equity and inclusivity, political voice and engagement, access for all, culture, archaeology and heritage, public art projects and programs, community events, tournaments and gatherings, parkland and park amenity management, as well as waterfront use and protection. So it encompasses a lot of the great elements that make Nanaimo a special place to live. And now getting into some of the formal policies and what we're really hoping you've got some feedback on today. First, equity and inclusivity. So this is an excerpt from the actual draft policy document. And you can see it has an introduction and then some desired outcomes. And then on the next slide, we'll be going through the specific policies. But I guess as a first question and first take, these desired outcomes are what we have heard through the community through our phase 1 and phase 2 engagement as what the community is hoping, again, our vision 25 years out to see, as well as what we've heard from previous discussions with this committee. And they include, the desired outcomes include an inclusive Nanaimo that provides opportunities for active involvement and prosperity for all, welcomes contributions for all members, facilitates participation and social interaction across cultures, orientations, ages, and abilities, and recognizes and fosters a respect for diversity. Environments and spaces across all areas of the city that are diverse and vibrant for the enjoyment of all residents. A celebration of diverse cultures and a community that is welcoming, inclusive, and accepting of all cultures. Equitable access to services, programs, and facilities for all residents, and continued city leadership in training, sharing resources, knowledge, and in applying an equity, diversity, and inclusion lens in city initiatives and decision making. And I know that many of these have come from this committee, so just wanted to pause here and see if this is meeting the mark or if there are any other gaps that you are sensing at this stage in the outcomes.
And I'd first like to recognize Sarah.
Thank you. And I went ahead and did, before I make my comment, I went ahead and did the community consultation online process. There's a link, and I went ahead and went through all of that, and it looked really wonderful. I felt like, as far as the gender diverse community goes, there was a lot of consideration, and it felt like in a lot of the sections, including this section, there was some mention and consideration. So that was wonderful to see. So specifically, when I read the first desired outcome, which is an inclusive Nanaimo, it's nice that it lists out facilitating participation in social interaction across, and it lists a number of different groups that might be considered in that. So facilitating participation or social interaction for different cultures, different orientations, different ages, different abilities. And then it stops short of saying different genders. And I think that's a really important one to include in there. And I think that was one of the pieces of feedback that I offered a couple of times throughout my response process. And so without it being mentioned, I think it can quickly fall to the background. And so if it is explicitly mentioned, just as different orientations is explicitly mentioned, I think that would be a very good thing.
Thank you, Sarah. And just so I understand, did I miss it? Was it not in a certain section? Because I do see here we've got gender under age, ability, gender, sexual orientation, under the equity and inclusivity.
Yeah, absolutely, it's there. And then I see no reason why we should spell out different cultures, different orientations, different ages, or different abilities at all in that inclusive Nanaimo, unless we're trying to be inclusive, in which case, let's say it again, that different genders should be considered.
I see why. I understand now. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And anyone else at this time? No? Okay, we can move on.
Councillor Martman, I just have a question for
Yes.
Kirsty. Kirsty, is this the kind of thing that you're looking for in the form of a motion, or are you okay taking this back and making those changes without a motion?
It's something that I think I will have to discuss with Lisa and Lisa. The feedback is great, and just seeing this, I think this is almost a housekeeping amendment where we're not being consistent with the words that we're using in the intro and what we have in desired outcomes. And it's not. This is something we hadn't noticed internally until the committee brought it forward. So whether I think some of these things are probably more straightforward updates than others. Others that are substantive changes definitely need to be made through a motion. And I'm going to invite Lisa Brinkman to speak up if there's anything else we should be saying. I think there can be a bit of both, though. This one, I think I understand what Sarah is saying about it should be consistent, and it's not consistent. And that's partly the process of how we've gone through many documents, over 40 documents. We've had many staff working on this. And so there's bound to be more straightforward edits, grammar and otherwise, and then substantive content edits definitely would need to be done through a motion with council.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
Lisa, do you have any other comments?
No, I agree with what you said, Kirsty. And hi, everyone. My name is Lisa Brinkman, new manager of community planning. So I look forward to working with you. So if it is important to you and you feel strongly about it, I do recommend making a motion. So, go ahead and do that. Yeah. Otherwise, we are listening and we are receiving your input through the other ways that Kirsty mentioned.
So in the creation of a motion, would you like to have something that we recommend that consistency and the recognition of desired outcomes is equity with gender as well? I am not sure what the motion should read.
Yeah, I agree with that, and maybe even the section number C4.2, that section C4.2, equity and inclusivity, include a reference to different genders in the outcomes, something along that line. Yeah.
Would you like to move that, Sarah?
Yeah, the wording that Kirsty used was great. Yes, I'll move that.
And seconder by Adrian. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Sorry, Councillor Martman, just before we vote on it, I just want to make sure we're really clear on the wording that we're voting on.
The way Kirsty said it.
I think it was Lisa.
Or Lisa. Okay, the way Lisa said it.
So that section C 4.2, equity and inclusivity reference, include a reference to different genders in the outcomes section.
In the, yes.
Okay,
for
thank you. For
yes. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, all those in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, motion carries. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, moving on to policies. I'm not going to read all of these out. I'm hoping that I'm sure all of you have read these in advance. But were there any policies under this equity and inclusivity section that you raised your eyebrows at, or you saw that there were gaps in what you were expecting? And this is definitely a section where we were thinking more about, like the intro says, equity and inclusivity of all genders, whereas the physical aspects of universal design and others are captured in a different section, and we will be getting to that. And I can read through all of these. I don't think that's a good use of our time, but I'm just wondering if there were any that jumped out of the page that the committee warranted some discussions on.
And I see Adrian with her hand up, and then Rachel.
Thank you. I am looking at C 4.2.3, and I am curious about the word fair. I'm not sure whether that should be replaced with equitable. I'd like to just know more about what I'm thinking about the equity versus equality image, and not sure if fair is a number or if fair refers to something relating to social planning, a checklist or something like that. So just need a little more clarity on that.
Thank you. Over to you, Christy.
And in this case, I can't tell you where the word fair came from. And I think, again, thanks for noticing things like this. This particular policy, I think, is reflected in several documents in its intention, but I think it's been wordsmithed, again, by a team. And the word fair may have snuck in, or it may have come from a social planning document. I'm not sure, but I know this is a policy that is also reflected in our 2005 Parks, Recreation, and Culture Plan and other areas as well. And I think that it's a really great comment, Adrian, because I think the intention is more equitable. Geographic equity probably is part of it, more than fair. And we don't have a definition for fair, so I don't know what that means either.
That's food for thought, because yeah, I'm thinking, and being that we're talking about equity, are we looking for an equitable distribution of community services? So, and we had Rachel next.
Hi, this is kind of a long point, so I apologize. But first I did want to say a big thank you to everybody who put this whole draft together. I read the whole thing, and a lot of thought and care went into this. Clearly, it was very obvious. So yeah, I think that's great. I'm kind of looking at C 4.2.2 in a housing kind of lens. It says incorporate an equity lens into land use planning decisions and resource allocation across Nanaimo. So I kind of think this applies to the housing crisis and the need for more supported housing and more low-cost housing. And I think this also relates to the financial policies, specifically C5.2. Human, social, and environmental capital, which seeks to attract new talent to the area. C5.5, placemaking and investment attraction, promotes a strong reputation inside and outside the city as an attractive place to live, learn, etc. And C5.6, tourism, which promotes the city's assets to make it a desirable place to live. So I think all these goals go together, which wasn't really shown in the, the related icons, because housing people reduces how many people, and should eliminate how many people are living on the streets. So it's like an equitable thing, and it's going to be financially good for the city, because right now Nanaimo has a reputation as a not so pretty place to be, because so many people are living on the streets because of unfair circumstances that have put them there. The mental health hospitals closing, for example, that's outside of people's control. Housing crises, again. So I think that using, policy C 4.2.2, as well as the financial kind of incentive policies, should maybe push the city to consider having a bigger plan than what I saw in this document to eliminate homelessness, because it's actually cheaper in the long term to eliminate homelessness than it is to continue to criminalize it. So I really think it'd be awesome if the city was willing to take another look at a broad scale, integrated approach to homelessness, because I did not really see that so much emphasized in this document. And like I said, I did read the whole thing.
Thank you. And no, that's valuable feedback, and just adding a couple 2 cents, even though, and you probably already know this, Rachel, homelessness is not actually in our mandate or our jurisdiction, but we're working with it, and we do end up talking about inclusivity and financial barriers and et cetera, and so one of the areas is actually in our land use planning, where we can talk about what kind of development occurs and whether there's rent to income housing, et cetera, et cetera. But I know that everybody's listening to your feedback. My 2 cents over to Adrian.
Thanks. And I just wanted to say, you know, when I saw the word fair, I immediately thought about housing too. And I immediately actually thought about the hard work of municipalities and local governments and the struggles over the years. You know, thinking back to, seems like eons ago now, when I was a reporter in Victoria, and, you know, I think both the city of Victoria and the city of Nanaimo were wanting to be part of the big mayors meetings or the big community meetings across the country, because population wise they were excluded. But when you look at the larger area, you look at, you know, how many people are going to be on the street, you know, outside of a major center, and how many people are going to come in to where there's more services and maybe more supports. And then, you know, those people might not have, they might have come, you know, from North Nanaimo, they may have come from Lantsville, they may have come from Saanich or Oak Bay or what have you into those centers, and then the municipality is struggling to keep up. And so I was thinking about, you know, fair distribution. Well, you know, I mean, maybe there's places where the downtown needs more. Maybe there's some things where, you know, things are more needed in the Oliver Woods area, but it's going to differ. And homelessness was actually at the core of the comment that I made as well.
I'm wondering if under C 4.2.2, when we equity lens into a land use planning decisions, is there anything in there about, and I know we use the word encourage in the document, is there something where we can incorporate that type of thought of, I don't want to say, it's not called low barrier housing, and I don't want to use a terminology of rent to income housing, but of that the development that happens is looking through a lens of availability. And I don't mean affordable housing, because I don't like that term anymore either, because that's too broad. Over to you, Kirsty. I don't know if you understood what I said, but
I think it's also that we're looking at an isolated section of the plan at the moment, and a lot of the affordable housing policies or land use policies are lying in other sections of the document. And if you bear with me, I'm just going to take us on a trip back to a previous slide and just show you that a healthy Nanaimo here does have affordable housing.
Housing, right.
I believe it was Sarah's comment about the icons and how we navigate the document. I think that's a really fair comment that we can act on to show those cross references where they're missing and the interpretation of how you're reading it. But it is in a different section specifically for affordable housing. But the land use components are actually more in, remember how we were talking about those two scales, the urban center scale and the neighborhood scale? And they actually sit in what we're calling the land use planning section, which is later in the document. It's about 60 pages. And we talk about equitable access, for instance, to green spaces there. Equitable access to transit is very much part of the land use decisions there. And the sketches and policies around neighborhoods and centers are also about the housing mix. And if we think back to December when we met with the committee and went through some of the the policies as they were in development, we also talked about accessible housing as well as affordable housing, and Dave Stewart brought some work that he was doing on those accounts forward. And so the goal would be that those would be reflected in this healthy section as well as this land use planning section more. But they still, everything is so integrated that it has to be reflected in the way that we have this very complicated, now integrated document. And in traditional models of official community plans, we would have had 40 or so plans that were all separated out. And because we've gone through this integrated approach where we're trying to layer and show redundancies of policies and integration of policies, I think we probably have missed the mark on showing some of those overlaps and how things are connected. So I really appreciate that feedback of showing how those different types of affordability and accessibility are not maybe as clear as they need to be. But I'm hoping that we have covered the actual policy part in some of these other sections. And again, Lisa, please speak up if you're aware of other parts of the plan that we should be pointing out to the committee.
I have nothing to add. Thanks, Kirsty.
And I've got a couple more speakers now, Rachel and then Sarah.
Yeah, my comment was more to reflect that, like, I didn't see a lot of like thought or emphasis on how the policies would eliminate homelessness, or like that it was even considered. Like, other cities across Canada have like kind of done some math and like realize it's cheaper in the long term, like to eliminate homelessness than to just like have like little pieces of like, oh yeah, we need more affordable housing. And like what I've kind of seen in the document is, oh yeah, we need more affordable housing. But like just doing that is good, but I don't think it's enough to deal with the scope and the scale of the homelessness crisis we're seeing. So like my feedback was kind of like, I see that it's in there, but I really don't think it's been maybe talked about on a grand scale enough. Like, also there's been social science studies on like how it's cheaper if you do a really comprehensive let's eliminate it than like current as-is approach.
This council is all over that, Rachel. Trust me, we're trying to get the supportive housing just open on Nickel Street. We need about 5 more of those. We need all types of housing that, and some of it is being built. And with the help of the provincial government, because we don't collect the taxes in order to be able to actually do that. But what we can as a council is advocate for it, and we have been. And then we're also looking for complex care, because we know that it's less expensive, as you say, if we're able to look after those people who cannot look after themselves, right? But I'm thinking, and Kirsty will correct me or be able to give you the right thoughts, but I'm thinking that particular is probably going to show up more under our targets and goals, because those are more related to actions that we may take in order to make a more livable community and improve safety and livable for all, right? It will come under our targets and our goals. And we are putting together, I think it's called SPO. That's coming together where we start to collaborate and work together as not-for-profit organizations as we all try to tackle the homelessness that we have. So anyways, that's my political thing. Kirsty, you may know the technical answer.
Well, the other section I think that really should be reflecting the homelessness part is the partnership section, because as you mentioned, Councillor Martman, it is something that typically falls out of our jurisdiction, but we are maybe a lead in helping to implement or helping to encourage. And so that's another area that, for instance, the SPO and others will be working under partnerships with the province and other local service providers. But I understand Sarah's point, and it is something, if you looked at our 12 Big Move posters or the 12 input theme posters, homelessness definitely was one of the themes that came up very strongly in the community as being something that needed to be talked about and included, as well as you probably saw equity and inclusivity, right? And accessibility. So those were definitely top of mind for the community as we went through the engagement processes. But as far as if council wants to, address a gap that maybe the committee is identifying in the policies, that's a discussion for this committee and then to a future council meeting.
Thank you. Sarah.
Thank you. I was making a note on looking at 4.2.8, C 4.2.8, and looking at that against C 4.2.5. So in 4.2.5, it talks about development of accessible and inclusive public spaces. So that's about public spaces. And in 4.2.8, it's about encouraging diversity awareness and building on a culture of compassion. So those are two very different subjects. Again, at the end of each of those points, it lists some examples. It seems like there is genders is again missing from 4.2.8 in an area where diversity awareness or education and building a culture of compassion and inclusion would very much be needed for the gender diverse community. I would think that the word gender should definitely be at that point so that it's stated explicitly.
And that's why we have extra sets of eyes and people being able to give us feedback. Good point. Thank you, Sarah. Is there anybody else in the section of policies? Okay, thank you very much. Kirsty.
I'll move on then. I also see another typo here. So again, just different ways of seeing it, right? And it's wonderful that you're helping us to do these edits. So this is where we were going to take a pause and just check in with the committee and see if you like the direction, if you have questions or you have concerns. I think we've heard. I'll ask you that and hope that maybe through a show of I don't know if you can actually do emojis like this, but maybe we can say if there's any more discussions, Councillor Martman, if any more topics to discuss. I think going through each slide like we have and talking about things on the spot has actually been really effective in this setting.
And we got one smiling emoji. Thank you, Rachel. So I think it was great. We went through this. I know we've done this process as council sometimes and we save our thoughts to the end, but I think this is better. There's another one from Jocelyn. And we've got one from Sarah. Hey, we're right on. You guys are doing a terrific job. Okay, so we'll move on to policies.
So for political voice and engagement, this committee is actually one of the committees that has come through because of the city's desire to have a more diverse political voice. And it's something that was brought forward based on recommendations from previous engagement studies. So I know that you're all familiar with how we've got here, but from a desired outcome point of view, to continue on this trajectory, we have added having an informed and aware community who can meaningfully participate in city processes and shape decisions. Opportunities for all people to express their voice on community matters important to them. City leadership in an active listening style to diverse voices in the community. Having space for representation that reflects the diverse population of Nanaimo, and having respectful and kind conversations that allow for differing opinions while demonstrating respect for others. Are there any gaps or any points that you'd like to make with those desired outcomes for political voice and engagement?
I think we must have done a good job on that one. I'm not seeing any hands raised at this time.
Great.
Okay.
So then moving forward onto the policy sections for political voice and engagement, ensuring that all people have opportunities to be engaged in city matters, using a variety of engagement tools and methods that encourage representation and diverse feedback, using statistically valid engagement methods, incorporating the voices of children, youth, and their families in city initiatives, continuing to work collaboratively with schools, higher education institutions, and others to leverage and support children, youth, and their families, and ensuring that vulnerable, marginalized, and underrepresented groups, including, and here's another list, children and youth, elders, those with physical, sensory, or cognitive disabilities, and their supporters, have opportunities to provide input in city services, programs, and policy development. Any feedback or comments on those policies?
I've got a thumbs up from Rachel. I think we've covered it. It's pretty good for political voice. This is, yeah, making sure that people have the ability to speak and to be heard.
Great. Well, maybe we'll get some happy faces then.
I got one thumbs up and a happy face. Yay.
The last policy section, access for all, and this is the goal of this was really to focus more on moving, so physical moving freely through the city and experiencing the community for individual well-being. And the desired outcomes, oops. There are many ways for people to move of all ages and abilities freely throughout the city without barriers. And people of all ages, abilities, and income levels have access, easy access to services and spaces without barriers. Are there any concerns in either the introduction to this section or the desired outcomes for this access for all element?
Not seeing any hands up.
Okay, and moving forward to policies then. We've categorized the policies in this section because there were a lot of them under several headings. And the first is more administrative. So again, I won't read all of these, but I'm wondering if there were any concerns with any of the policies here under access for all in the administrative subcategory.
Is there anybody that noticed anything that jumped out at them, or where we might be missing something or need something added? I'm not seeing any hands.
And again, this section here, C.4.3, is one of the sections that we know is very near and dear to this committee's heart, and that you've been instrumental in kind of leading the way and informing how the city should be leading the way with these different accessible communication methods and engagement methods. Okay, I'll move on then to the next subheading. The next two subheadings are related to parks and recreation facilities. Again, the physical aspects of those facilities, and then the programs that are offered through different recreation centers or different partners that have recreation centers or recreation programs that we work with. And there's the policy section here related to these physical policies, but also in some of the land use planning elements of the plan, there's more how physically those are going to be integrated through local hubs throughout the community, and how down the road we could be working with other partners to use their spaces to, again, provide other opportunities throughout the community for both parks and recreation facilities and recreation programs. Are there any comments related to either of these headings at this time? And we can come back to these later. I know it's a lot of text to be looking through.
So far, no hands. Oh, wait. Got Adrian.
Too slow. I'm sorry.
That's slow. Okay.
So I am looking at C4.414 and C4.415. And I feel like those would be good places to also include the word genders. Thinking to my own, the things that my own kids have done, and the the work that the city's doing in those areas. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I think that's the kind of comment where, as staff, we really struggled, Adrian, in how we organize this. And I think that Lynn and Laura and their team might be making some structural integration suggestions down the road as well. We were trying under the Access for All to have more of a lens of barrier-free physical access, and in the inclusivity and equity section, trying to have a lens of the same. So it should be consistent subheadings, but with more of the equitable and the genders and all people access. And there's been discussions of should we have collapsed them all into one section so that it's everything in one area and not across these 3 chapters. And I think those discussions are still ongoing, because our intention is that equitable access for all, but this chapter was more on the physical navigation, as well as feeling welcome in all of those places and physically being welcome.
Yeah, and I feel the same as others have said. I think that the work on this is amazing. There's so much heart in this document, and I really appreciate it. Where that comment came from, it was specific to Girls Get Active, which is a program that my daughter has done, and a program that she had questions about, given her, her engagement around pride and pride activities at her school, and questions that she started asking, and so it stuck out right away for me because of that.
No, that's great. And Laura or Lynn, I don't know if you have any comments, but my understanding is that based on some of that feedback, the Girls Get Active program has actually made some shifts in recent offerings when it comes to gender.
I can't speak to that. Laura might be able to. But yes, just backing up a little bit, our team has reviewed this document as well, and we have made quite a few suggestions under this area, and also a lot of suggestions to add gender in there as well. Laura, did you have any feedback on our programs?
Well, one thing not related to this exercise today, but that we've put on the agenda for our September meeting, is to have some folks from the program team come and do a presentation to this committee with what our programming offerings are and how and where we strive to be inclusive, and then so we want to do a presentation on what we're currently doing, and then get your feedback on ideas for other ways that we can change or do modifications or new programs or change programs based on your feedback. Girls Get Active has been on our radar for several years. We do accept all children to participate. We do have some kids that would fall under the gender diverse or creative kids category. We've got some kids in there that are trans, and we do welcome everyone to participate in the Girls Get Active. We're just not sure exactly what to do with the heading or the description in the activity guide. So that's something where we would look to this committee during that presentation in September for your directions, suggestions, and advice.
Okay. And it was good information to share. And we'll move back to Rachel.
Hi again. Yeah, I think also like it's good that your programs are accepting people whose gender isn't, say, male or female for the program, but gender could be a physical access need as well, because if someone has X on their passport or birth certificate, they may not have their application go through on the website or something. So I think gender could actually be a physical access point. And second, maybe income would be appropriate word in all ages, abilities, and incomes. I'm not sure. Like, I know that's covered on the left in the policy. Oh, I can't read it now, sorry. But for like all programs or something, but just in that specific one, I don't know. Maybe income also would be considered.
Good point. Thank you. Okay. Seeing, oh, Lynn wants to speak. Yes, Lynn.
Thanks, through the chair. I just wanted to point out that we consider financial under abilities.
Thank you. I know everything's integrated. If it's not here, it's there. And so back to Kirsty.
Thank you. I've just moved away from a loud air conditioner that came on, so just setting up again. Bear with me. And I also just wanted to add that this is really unique at the moment to have, before we move on to these new policy areas, something like recreation and parks in the official community plan. So this is new for us. Typically, these would have been policies that would have been sitting in a Parks, Recreation, and Culture plan. And because of this integrated nature, we're adding a lot of topics that wouldn't typically be in a plan like this. So it's new territory for us to do that. And I think it's worthy of continuing the discussion because of that. So the next subheadings, and I think these are the last ones under Access for All, are land use and development and mobility and transportation. And I know that previous, this committee has showed previous interest in both of these topic areas. Are there any comments regarding what you see for the land use and development or mobility and transportation policies?
And I'm not seeing any hands up at this time.
Councillor Martman, Rachel has raised her hand.
Oh, Rachel.
Hi. Sorry, I have lots of comments. I have lots of notes.
That's what we're here for.
So I was kind of linking this section of mobility and transportation to the D5.5 active mobility and primary transportation network. So my comments are, I want to be applicable to both. But I really appreciate how they are considering, you know, pedestrians as well as cyclists and vehicles and like transit users. Like, I think that's just fabulous. Your guys' efforts in this, like, I'm really happy. I was wondering if alleys in existing neighborhoods could be considered as part of the pedestrian infrastructure. Like, I know that mobility, it's called part of the mobility network in section D5.5, and connector trails, for example, in cul-de-sacs are mentioned, but alleys in like grid style neighborhoods are not. And like, I think that they need to be considered part of the public transit infrastructure because pedestrians and cyclists and stuff, like, we use those to shorten our route when we're walking places or rolling places. And some of the alleys where I live are not as accessible as like public trails. Like, they have massive potholes, they're not maintained. Like, so the neighbors will throw gravel on the alleys to make it just slightly drivable. Like, it's really bad. I live near VIU in the Harewood kind of neighborhood overlap area. So I'm pushing for the city to include alleys in their mobility and transportation plan.
Wow, I never ever thought of that. Thank you. And I live in Harewood as well. And have an alleyway. So a good point. So, Kirsty.
Well, specifically on alleys, I think I'd actually have to do a bit of a word search and talk to, unless Bill, who I know was with us earlier, if he has some comments. I think the alleyway network is intended to be part of the street network and already reflected in our transportation policies. But whether or not it's clearly articulated, Sarah, is perhaps another story. So I would have to do a little bit of homework and come back to you on the integration of the alleys, but I believe it's part of the city's street network. So the intention is that fine-grained way of moving throughout the city would be assumed, but maybe isn't clearly enough spelled out in that connected section. I don't know if Mr. Sims is here still or not.
I am.
Oh, there he is.
Thanks, Noe. It's an interesting point, Alice, because they are, as Kirsty said, part of the street network, and more for vehicular service, whether it's or access to rear properties and garbage pickup as an example. They're not well maintained, admittedly, and not really intended to be part of the pedestrian network, or the mobility network, I should say. That would be my first sort of, or maybe let me put it as my old way of thinking, and I had not considered alleys as, you know, the potential for a mobility network. So that's an interesting concept. But I definitely admit that they're not as well maintained, because they're sort of intended for very local use as well. So our resources tend to go where there's higher traffic or higher mobility.
Thank you, Mr. Sims. Jocelyn. You're muted.
Sorry. I have a question about C4.4.26 about where possible exceed minimum requirements for universally accessible parking access and design standards. My understanding is that the responsibility on that has been sort of pushed to the municipalities, and there is no longer a standard for it. So I'm curious what the requirements, what minimum requirements is this referring to?
Kirsty.
Great question, Jocelyn. I know previously in both the BC Building Code and just what I learned in school for accessible public space design as a landscape architect, there were minimum standards, which really were more North American standards, the landscape architectural professional standards. Now, whether or not they're still part of the BC Building Code, I would have to do some homework on it again. Can tell you though that we are, for instance, bringing forward some design details for you in the month of April at your regular meeting regarding accessibility design at Westwood Lake. And I know it's something that you've provided feedback in before. And part of that presentation shows where the minimum by at least the public space design standards for North America typically would have been 4, and we're putting in 8. And there's other elements that we'll be sharing with you based on committee feedback previously around rear and side facing loading for those stalls. But they're if the rules have changed recently, then perhaps this does need to be rewritten to reflect those new requirements or new standards. And again, maybe Mr. Sims knows more about that than I do. This was based off of probably old text from building codes, and then those public space design rules of thumb, really, more than by law requirements.
I just wonder whether, because my understanding, having been on a unrelated committee with Spark BC and a bunch of consumers, disabled people, talking about parking standards. We looked at several provinces that have their own standards and the CSA standard, and came up with kind of a demonstration video with the city of Vancouver, showing how some of those standards work or don't work for modern accessible vehicles. But my understanding is that I think a lot of people are hoping that the Accessibility Act in BC will add it back into the building code or will mention it in some way. And I just wonder if, in light of the uncertainty about what the standard is in BC, that Nanaimo, like in this statement, which I'm super, super glad to see in this plan, just mentions instead of exceeding minimum requirements is like work to describe Nanaimo's, a high level of accessibility and Nanaimo's accessible parking standards or something, just to I think that it's going to be a while before we truly understand what that looks like. And I think it's great to try and exceed those, what we currently understand as parking standards. But it's such a moving target that I think it's important that Nanaimo have a stated, here is what we expect out of accessible parking in the city.
Did you have anything to add, Mr. Sims? Or
I appreciate Jocelyn's context, because that's really helpful. And Kirsty's right. I think this really points to parking lots and those sorts of things. And I certainly support how can we define this better. I see it maybe more in the action item, and it's going to be a hard requirement that we would have either in our building bylaw or even in our engineering standards, perhaps. But maybe even still, the language here could be sharpened to reflect some of the things that Jocelyn was saying.
Thank you. And Richard. And you're muted, Richard, if you're speaking.
Sorry, I'm not as quick today. My wrist is really sore. I just wanted to comment that I feel like there's a bit of a disconnect between our current parking bylaws in regards to accessibility and way of having parking be more accessible significantly. But I kind of feel like that might launch into another topic. I feel like our standards for having parking be accessible when, say, building complexes, like say if you're renting and they're charging parking, that's kind of another barrier for being able to have accessible parking stalls top of it, right? And it's just been creating a bit of an issue in my community because all the streets are packed with cars.
Right.
And no one can then find an accessible parking stall because all the streets are completely packed. So.
And in regards, were you able to review the policies, Richard, or when it comes to the mobility and transportation, were you able to access it?
Yes, I'm just having some difficulties with trying to reference anything specific.
Oh, that's okay. Kirsty might be able to comment more on this.
Yeah, I think the committee's raised a couple of really good points that we hadn't thought of before. Again, we stressed at the beginning that we wanted this to be a universal bylaw that was as applicable as possible for 25 years. And some of what the committee has brought up through this discussion is pointing to me, or showing me, where we might be amending this bylaw as these policies are written on a regular basis. So I just want to bring forward thanks for that, because I think you've brought forward some points where we don't want to be too specific here. These are supposed to be motherhood and more visionary statements to help inform some of those future details and actions that we'll be fleshing out further. With response to what's in the parking bylaws right now, Richard, I'm not the expert at that. I think Mr. Sims would be able to offer more comment on those. But I think the intention of this language is that it's open and as universal as possible, so that we have to do as few amendments over the next 10 to 25 years as we need to, and that it's informing our work despite how those details might be changing in those secondary documents.
Thank you. And Rachel.
Yeah, I also had a couple notes regarding parking. It was actually for the sections of C 2.1.7, managing parking citywide, and C 2.2.8, and that was on like affordability and like parking, like volume, the city trying to reduce cars, which is great. I think that's awesome. You guys are doing this. However, like some people have disabilities and need a car to get around. And again, some people have small children and need a car, and some seniors maybe don't identify having a disability, but they need it to get around. So I was just wondering, are you guys building in, maybe not into the actual policy, but into the implementation plan, like plans for reduced cost for people with disabilities and seniors and people with young children who need vehicles and who need accessible parking? Like, because I'm not really seeing it in the policy section, so maybe it's in the implementation section.
And Kirsty.
To be honest, I don't think specifically around cost for car ownership. I don't think that there is anything specific, and I don't really know, maybe others can comment on what would be in our mandate of what we can control and offer as far as that goes. But for transit, there is. And so that's something that in partnership with the Regional District of Nanaimo that we are looking at ways of reducing barriers regarding transit, whether it be on demand or other forms of transit that are being creatively considered. But as far as car ownership specifically goes, I don't think that's an area that we've considered to the state, Rachel.
Oh, I might have misspoke. I meant like the parking costs that the city is in charge
of.
Oh,
costs. Okay, I see.
We do have something for those with disability, I believe.
Yeah, and don't people with the handicap, excuse me, sorry for interrupting, have free parking and can park over longer periods?
I believe it was 4 hours at one time, but Mr. Sims may know more about that. Or Mr. Rose, I'm not sure. Whomever can answer that one.
Yeah, I think Jamie might be the much more qualified on this one.
Okay.
I'll ask him to step in. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks very much. So yeah, I think there's a bit of correct information and a bit of maybe clarification I can provide. So the vehicles or car owners that do have the Spark placard are enabled or are allowed to park for free in any parking spot downtown right now. And so there is no cost for that. We do have some spots that are explicitly for operators that have the placard. Some are on street, some are in our parkades. Just jumping back, I think there's a bit of a question about the fees associated with parking in relation to accessibility and so I think that pricing for parking is incredibly complex at its most simple form. It's very market driven, it's location dependent, and it's something that is on our radar to review. I think if it's going to land anywhere in this process, it'll be in an action plan. But all of the discussion that's taken place is definitely something that I've been sort of taking notes of, and we can incorporate into those conversations when we get to the action items.
Thank you. And Richard, you still have your hand up, but you're muted. So I'm assuming you didn't have anything further to add?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. And Kirsty.
So that's the end of this section for policies related to access for all. Are there any further discussions? I know we've gone through many different topic areas in this. It was a loaded section for sure. If not, we'll move on to the next steps.
I think we're good to move on.
Great. Oh,
one more.
Okay, I'm wrong. So just some background information. Again, I think You know what? This is a slide that's out of order. This was part of our definitions, and I don't know how we didn't catch that prior, but I think we can skip this. Okay, next steps. So we mentioned that the engagement period right now is open until April 8th for phase 3 engagement, and this date is not correct. Well, no, this date is correct. The engagement period is only till April 8th at the moment. The period that council is reviewing the phase 3 through final bylaw adoption will take until the summer of 2022. So just want to reiterate that through phase 1 and phase 2 of this process, we're now in phase 3, but we've had a lot of really in-depth engagement both through this committee and through the general Nanaimo population, and we've tried to reflect all of that back. And I mentioned how in some of our big move posters, we had specific posters related to accessibility and equity because those have been themes that the community has really valued. And additionally, housing, homelessness, and affordable housing has been another a real theme throughout the community. Through previous discussions with this committee, we've talked about all of these topic areas. So I'm just noticing at the bottom, accessible parking, and we've had discussions about parking. Pronouns and gender neutral language in corporate communications, I know has been something this committee has brought forward. I don't think that was specifically touched upon in the policies, but it certainly is ongoing throughout discussions with senior leadership and in some of the actions, which you might be looking at in the future. Accessibility and design standards in civic facilities and public spaces. You've shown concerns about the design standards and also inclusion of comforts such as benches. And I hope that you have seen language that captures some of that. And again, in the action plans, I know you've talked about accessibility of sidewalks and the different public space areas for walking, universal washrooms in public spaces. And there is some language about updating all park facilities for gender neutral washrooms or universal washrooms in public spaces. There's no date provided, but we do in our action plans have actions related to that. Adult changing stations and washrooms has come up a lot through this committee, and again, it's something that we're trying to reflect back through this process. Having a broad representation of community in both projects and committees. And hopefully you're seeing that by all these projects, exciting projects that we're bringing forward to you as staff over the coming months. And Laura's saying she's got people lined up for you right through September, which is great. Something that came through our workshop in December was a target percentage of housing that is accessible. And I think this is something that we're still discussing. I think we were throwing around at that conversation a 10%, but it's still under discussion. Having safe spaces and inclusionary spaces throughout the community. And again, this discussion about parking and some of the new designs that we will be trying in public spaces will be coming to you in an April presentation. Again, the posters with the 12 big moves, which are available online, and I know some of you have looked at. Inclusivity and equitability are one of the main themes. So if you haven't had a chance to look at these online, up until April 8th, we have specific comment forms related to each one of these big moves, which are again attached to the policies, and we've done the deep dive today with you as a committee. But we're hoping that you can share this information with your friends and your networks so that we have a really robust engagement on all of these topic areas. Won't go into the details on this, but if you haven't already looked at it, this is one of the posters related or info sheets related to inclusivity and equitability. And I'm happy to email it to you directly if you're having trouble finding it on our Get Involved platform. But this is the setup of the comment sheet. And again, we're looking to you as committee members to provide us direct input, but also to share this information with your networks so that we can have as many people comment in all of these topic areas as possible. So if you haven't already done that, please do through your work networks, your personal networks. Lisa, I don't know if you know what our count right now is for our surveys, but it had been fairly low. So we're trying to do a push as we move closer to April 8th to get as many people responding to the community sample as possible.
The numbers are climbing, but we would love for you to do a survey, and yes, and for all your friends to do a survey as well.
And then at the moment, from March 1st through April 8th, we're looking to have engagement in many different forms, including a story map, which is quite an interesting online tool for if you haven't played around with it, again, with comment forms attached. We have the community survey. We also have a statistically valid survey, which some of you might have been lucky enough to get mailed to you if you've been part of our sample, but it's reaching many demographics throughout the city. The 12 theme info posters. We're just launching a video that's recently been created through our social media channels. We're looking at having some open houses coming up, I believe, next week. And there will also be review through through council at many of the GPCs. I'm not actually sure if there's still an e-town hall on our horizon or not. If there is, it's in the month of May, though. Lisa, you might have more details on that.
I don't have information on the e-town hall, but the open house is next Tuesday, the Bevan Social Center.
So again, get the word out to your friends, please, because we are seeking feedback from as many people as possible. And just to reiterate this timeline with you, we have a GPC meeting next Monday on the 28th, and we'll be bringing forward any motions that come out through of this committee through to council at that, as well as reviewing with them on May 9th, a full engagement summary, which will include comments that we've received today from this committee, as well as motions, as well as the general population and other staff teams, all through that May 9th timeframe. But again, if there's other motions, and I'm thinking back to some of the definition discussions, maybe that the committee wants us to bring forward sooner, we certainly can do that. It can just be, or otherwise we'll just let council know that there's been discussions around some of the specific glossary terms for future consideration. But we're working towards a bylaw adoption for July of this summer, and then moving forward in some of the implementation and action plans through the fall and through winter 2022. But there's a lot of work still to be done over the months of May, June, and July to get this draft city plan into a bylaw form. And again, complicated flow chart, but just showing you that really all your feedback is going to councils for consideration at the GPCs. We're tracking everything. I know that Sky and Kelly are taking really great notes today. Again, all that feedback will be coming forward to council, just like community feedback and staff feedback for consideration of changes. And we have a really tight time frame then to turn around those edits as staff in May and June to make that July bylaw adoption time. It's an extremely tight timeline. And that's really the end of the presentation today and what we wanted to share with you and get feedback on. But we really appreciate all the very insightful comments, and we know that it's a long document to read, and we know that you have been going through in great detail. So we really appreciate the comments that we received today, as well as please don't be afraid to reach out if you have other thoughts as the next few weeks unfold up till April 8th.
Thank you so much, Kirsty, and thank you so much for everybody that's involved in this. It is an outstanding document, and we're going to make it even better. Rachel.
I just had a comment about readability of the document. Obviously, it's meant as a city plan, but like when it's being distributed for people to consume, you know, who maybe aren't educated in what statistics are and things, like I just had a bit of a comment on many times the city plan referenced a statistically valid survey and didn't explain what that meant until around page 200. I didn't write down what page I was on when I finally found. Now, I'm in statistics in university. I've taken lots of methods classes. I knew what was going on, but your average person may not have until page 200 and something. So I thought maybe like it's hard balancing what the city needs with like readability, but like maybe in future something like that could go near the beginning.
You bet. No, that's fantastic feedback. And again, glossary term, we can do one of those pullouts because we are relying on that statistically valid number in so many areas where we're backing up what we're doing with engagement and what those numbers were. So thank you very much for that, Rachel.
I don't see anybody else with any further comments. So I did want to say again, thank you to everybody for attending this meeting. It was special for us to be able to give more feedback. And I really appreciate that and all the staff's time as well. If I can get a motion to adjourn.
And Councillor Martin, just to let you know, there's no one here for question period.
Oh, good. Oh, beginning to end. There you go. Motion to adjourn. Got Jocelyn, seconded by Adrian. All those in favor. Thank you, everybody. See you next month. Bye.